Anytime you want to start.
Right, thank you, Henry. So we are at the beginning. I'm going to talk about today about several important issues that are influencing successful functioning of the research ethics committee. So let us start with the first slide. According to Hyder and colleagues, even when properly enacted, rules and regulations of research ethics can fall short of their full potential because of several conditions, such as limited institutional commitment, inadequacies in research ethics reviews, and careless or willfully unethical investigator conduct. So, what I mean to say here is that even though we might have quite nice ethical regulations in our countries, and I'm speaking here not only about Egypt or Jordan or Belarus or any other country. I'm speaking of in general of any country. So the rules and regulations by themselves are not enough. There must be some kind of backup. There must be necessary conditions to make this all work. And let us look at what would these conditions be like. So here it is. Here's the scheme by Hyder and colleagues. In the end of this presentation, you will have the list of the used sources, so you can find this article later on in your own. And he starts with developmental conditions here. Those are the most important ones, and he thinks that without these developmental conditions, you cannot really seriously talk about any kind of serious ethics review. Then he has enabling conditions, another very important aspect. And these two, they interact together to create one would say, a climate for the rest of the scheme. And that is starting from, let's say, national regional strategy, which is then influencing both quality of research ethics review and institutional commitment. So there's this connection. And then this is influencing also investigators' conduct, and this is also influencing, and here's the influence. So this is all mutually bound together as a kind of a network. I will proceed on today, starting from a very general thing, which would be the developmental conditions, and then we will go more and more in specifics. And the problem is, whenever one does talk about such things, we know more about these developmental conditions because they're more general, but we know less about the other conditions. And here I use some of Professor Silverman's fantastic articles on the topics about especially Egypt and Jordan. So Hyder is using, and we're still talking about Adnan Hyder, and he's using several things that he borrows from Amartya Sen, and those are the following. Sen links developmental conditions to protection of individuals and then to promotion of ethical conduct and research. And Sen conceptualizes the development in terms of 5 basic freedoms that are necessary for foundation of any research ethics systems. And you can read all about that in a book by Amartya Sen, a very famous ethicist and a thinker. All right, so if this is clear, we can probably move on to the next slide. This means free elections, free speech, and freedom of scrutiny and criticism. And not just in a general sense, but in regard to research ethics, it means establishing fair and appropriate representation of research ethics review committees. It means that they are not monopolized by any kind of either political or social group. Then scrutiny and challenges of the investigators' proposals. This is very important because for the system of review to function, you need to have people to be able to scrutinize those proposals correctly. And then widespread acceptance of authority and legitimacy of decisions of Research Ethics Committee. This is one of the problems. I put it out in red because this is one of the problems in Latvia, where you have these committees, but their reputation is really not that high. And then the final thing is, and here I'm using commentary by Lavery, this is from his article, authority to impose corrective actions, sanctions, and penalties of noncompliance. So the political freedoms in relation to research ethics, these are those freedoms SEN speaks about. I have some questions for you. I thought it might be interesting for you to ask yourselves, how would you evaluate, in light of recent events, the level of political freedom in Egypt and Jordan? Is the level of democracy sufficient? And is there a possibility for free scrutiny and criticism of the protocols?
Oh, yes, I just mentioned that we are getting there. I don't know, I'm sure you know what's happening now in Egypt. So we hope this political freedom will be attainable in a few months and so on.
That's nice to hear. That's nice to hear, really. Thumbs up for you guys. I hope you're going to get your freedom that you rightfully deserve.
Thanks.
So, moving on, shall we? The developmental conditions, the first ones were political freedoms, and the second condition is economic facilities, such as free market and enabling powers of income and wealth. And this is important because it gives people economic possibility of participating in research ethics enterprise. I mean, there's this, anything is happening at all, and then secondly, sufficiently high economic priority granted to research ethics in society as to ensure protection and accountability commensurate with research activity and potential harm. These two are the economic factors that influence. So political freedoms, economic facilities, and followed by my little assessment of, I tried to compare the countries on the basis of economic development. And I used this, perhaps, not the safest criteria, but GDP per capita. And you might notice that for Egypt, it's $2,700. For Jordan, it's $4,200. For Latvia, it's $10,500, and for US, it's $46,000 per capita. So by this, I don't mean to say that more money or bigger economic facilities means that only then you can have some ethics. Of course, you can have ethical treatment also in case of not so developed economy, and probably because it's much easier to sort of find ways how to ignore the rules of ethical conduct. So moving on, arrangements for education, healthcare, and related opportunities. Research ethics requires appropriate educational opportunities in many disciplines, not just in most obvious ones, and meaningful opportunities for gainful employment for people who pursue specialized training in research ethics. This is also very important. I'd say if I would be, I could use myself as an example here. If I would specialize only in research ethics, I would not be able to make a living in Latvia. I'm working at a university and I'm teaching research ethics. So I earn my bread by teaching ethics, but not necessarily by specializing in that. So this education gives me no special opportunities in the labor market. And as far as I know, the situation might be contrary in other countries, more developed countries, where if you are a specialist in ethics and research ethics, you can be an expert. You can sort of live by doing that. Right. So moving on. So, transparency guarantees. And here we are talking about openness and trust and mechanisms that minimize corruption, financial irresponsibility, and underhanded dealings. Independence of committees from undue institutional or personal influence is a direct consequence of this. And as a comparison, here I try to compare what is known as Corruption Perception Index. And in 2010, you can see here that it deciphers as highly clean to highly corrupt. And in 2010, Egypt ranked here 3.1, Jordan ranked 4.7. In comparison to your neighboring countries, Iraq ranked 1.5, Syria 2.5, Saudi Arabia 4.7, Latvia lower than that, 4.3, so quite a corrupt country. And US 7.1, way better. You can actually find out more about these ratings if you follow this website. So moving on, then there is protective security, scheme for social and institutional arrangements for preventing serious harm occurring to, of course, research subjects. And that requires mechanisms and appropriate authority to limit risk exposure, and requires authority to challenge and end, where necessary, research activities that entail undue risk. So, then you can see now that these are just 5 basic developmental conditions. Let's look at the enabling conditions. Enabling conditions are mechanisms for protection of research subjects that have the most impact in context of appropriate these enabling conditions. And these are values, strong civil society, and these ones, values and strong civil society, are the basic ones. Values, as expressed in other domains, I refer here to Hyder scheme, because, of course, we mean values in research ethics. To your mind, it might be Bellman's report, the Bellman principles, or the 4 principles expressed in Beecham's and Childress 4 principles approach. These would be also the values for research ethics, but they have to be also supported in other domains. And a strong civil society, that is the problem. And in Latvia, we have a fairly young democracy. It's just 20 years old, and our civil society is still rather weak, partially because of the corruption in politics. This means simply this, that you might even create a reasonable civil society support for what you mean to induce some change in society, but then it would fail because the politicians would simply ignore it, and that's the problem we have. So the questions that you may ask yourselves: is the general moral climate, the values, beliefs, and attitudes favorable for responsible conduct in research? And how would you evaluate the role of civil society in your country? We saw that in Egypt, that role of civil society really did change the situation. So this is the power that the people, in fact, actually have. And this is the whole reason why because of many failures, democracy is the system that is sort of that we see that's the most effective for research ethics as well. Okay.
Thanks. This is Henry. Specifically, what's the connection between the role of civil society and protection of research subjects?
Specifically, it means that civil society allows people for more protection. People simply feel that they have some say into how things are happening. And in Latvia, we have, for instance, one of the ways how civil society works is through NGOs. And there was up to I think it was 2008, an NGO that was called Bureau for Protection of Patients' Rights. So this is, for instance, one way.
So you're saying there's more likely to be external organizations or institutions that would express more, for the lack of a better term, vocally the need to protect human subjects. So there'd be like an external monitoring or an external voice. It heightens the awareness of the need to protect human subjects. Is that the major mechanism going on?
I would agree with you. Yes, I think that is what is happening. At least the Latvian example. I'm not too familiar with how the way civil society works in Jordan or Egypt, but in Latvia it is the case that people themselves, contrary to perhaps the United States, where the idea of grassroots democracy, this civil protest is much better established. We are a post-Soviet country. We are used to authority rule, and the idea that someone has a right to speak is yet new to us. And that's why NGOs as facilitators, as sort of speaking for the people, are the ones that now take this place. They take up the mantle of civil society, although it's not like civil society as it is generally, normally, traditionally understood.
Regarding civil society in Egypt, I think, I don't know, I'm not sure, but I think it had become quite active in the last few years because the government was not really doing its job well. So I'm not sure that you have to have democracy to have a well-functioning civil society, because sometimes when the government fails, some organization come up and they try to fill in the gap. This was one comment regarding civil society in Egypt. Another thing is, would you consider civil society to play a role being the watchdog of unethical behavior, especially research ethics related?
Okay, thank you for your comments, Amal. I would first perhaps start on elaborating a little bit on what I meant by democracy. There are two ways how to understand it. And first one is de jure, which would be democracy by constitution, by the law. And then second one would be de facto. And I see Egypt as democracy in de facto, people taking over the power and kind of having their say. So even though there was not too much democracy politically, like de jure, then de facto there was. And secondly, yes, I agree with you. The watchdog is a good way how to put it. Our NGOs have been generally watchdogs. Our cohort of professionals, very important part. Since the very recent in Latvia, there was, seriously speaking, no cohort of trained professionals, and I'm one of the first ones who has any sort of education specifically in research ethics and bioethics. And that's thanks to Fogarty Foundation that has this program of advanced certificates program for ethics in Central and Eastern Europe. Something pretty similar to what probably you are having. I mean, by the contents, not maybe by the organization. Then healthy working population, public accountability. That's public accountability is truly a painful issue in Latvia, because we have this probably a pretty familiar issue to you as well, that whatever politicians do, they do it without consulting with society. They do it behind closed doors, and we only know about it later on when it's already legitimized, when you can't even object about it. So that is one problem. And then trust in basic transactional processes. It's a simple trust, and if I promise you that I'm gonna say be there tomorrow at 8 o'clock, and you can trust me that I'll do it. And this is the sort of everyday feeling that whether you can or cannot trust other people, as well as this can be transferred also to society and government relationships. And then freedom of people to determine boundaries of personal risk. This is probably this is to be interpreted as a freedom for anyone to participate, to take part in research ethics as a participant of some kind of research. Whether that is free or not, whether there's some kind of control over that as well.
Vance, Gloria would like to ask something. Gloria?
My comment was this. I think that the situations that we live in other countries outside the United States is the fact that protection of participants in research in the United States is federally mandated. Everywhere else, it is not a mandate, and it's been left in the hands of the IRBs. And I think that's one of the big problems, because IRBs or research ethics committees have a lot of other things to do besides having to follow up on the researchers and on institutions, and their job is not to provide accountability. That's the problem of the institution.
Yes, you're quite right. You're quite right. Their job is not to provide accountability. On the other hand, they are one of those who can perhaps assume this role. This also depends in many ways on how you define research ethics committees. For instance, our Central Medical Ethics Committee, somewhere in its rules, its constituting rules, that are accepted actually as a law, they're this function of facilitating the transparency and the dialogue, and etc. So some committees could be specially attributed this function.
One thing that Gloria said, I would like to comment on that. She said that it's federal in the U.S. It's federally mandated by a law, the concept of protection of human subjects, and I'm just wondering if that fact in and of itself heightens the awareness among everyone involved in research that someone from high up in the government has stated in clear terms that research subjects needs to be protected. I mean, on the surface, it almost sounds like it might not be necessary for someone to say research subjects needs to be protected, but I'm just wondering the effect of that statement being articulated in an actual law, that people that whole concept gets elevated to a higher level in the consciousness of everyone. So I'm just wondering about that effect of actually having a law that says something like that in clear terms, as opposed in other countries where it's merely assumed that research subjects would require protection.
What can I say is just that probably you're right. I would wish to see more legit back up from the law, from the side of the law, and legitimizing this need for protection. We have several laws in Latvia that sort of do this, at least in pharmacy. They're much more stricter, and in human genome research they are. But not generally. We have such areas as human research in psychology, which is non-clinical, or in anthropology, or even in sociology, which is not monitored anyhow. So there are differences also between the kinds of research which is monitored. We're talking about trials there, much tighter. The oversight is much tighter. One of the biggest problems in describing and evaluating the elements of research ethics system is the absence of information. I'm saying this, as many of you perhaps know, that just to gather the information of how many are there of such committees in the country can be quite a difficult task. And there's also an issue of how much information about research ethics system is publicly available. By publicly, I mean in newspapers, in internet, whether they have websites or not, whether they issue some kind of public accounts of what they did this year, how many protocols were reviewed and approved or disapproved, and are these institutions willing to share such information? We have a certain problem when we were researching Latvian committees, that several committees simply ran away from us, literally. One of those representatives I approached personally and asked him whether he would agree to answer several questions I handed in the questionnaire. And when he noticed the questions about financing, he immediately said, "This is none of your business." And remember, this is a representative research ethics committee, which is supposed to be transparent and open and cooperative. So he said, "This is not your business, and I will not answer any of your questions. Leave me alone." So such was our sad experience. So from this, I conclude, and this was also published in my article, more often than not, in the most justified inquiries, because we came as representatives of Hyder University, which is a medical university, we wanted just to know the general statistics about how the research ethics committees worked. And they were very kind of reserved about our inquiries because they thought that we actually are looking for something. It's an act attempt to inspect and report a possible misconduct, which it was not. But it turned out, as a report of not reporting. National and regional strategy. Few countries have a national strategy. Countries have a diversified system of ethical review that has special rules for every region. Latvia doesn't have such a thing. So what are the elements here? National guidelines, relevant national bodies, membership and affiliation with research ethics groups, and that was a bit ahead. So these are the elements of the strategy. So you have to have the bodies, the ethics committees themselves, then you have to have guidelines and laws, and then you have to have people in those affiliated with research ethics groups. In Latvia, this is a very painful issue. There's almost no such thing. There's no government funding for those, except for the main ones. There is a need for development of national research ethics guidelines, national operating standards, and the establishment of an accreditation mechanism for research ethics committees that can reduce variability among the existing research ethics committees. And this is said in an article by Salim and Professor Silverman, and it's said about national and regional strategy in Egypt. A comment that none of the research ethics committees reported having a budget, while 5 stated that their members received financial compensation. And the situation, I have to say, is pretty similar to that in Latvia. So I know exactly what this means. So none of the RECs have a budget, except the Central Medical Ethics Committee, which is barely enough to pay the rent and all the paper expenses. So they also do not receive fees. But they can receive fees, in Latvia, the law says they can receive fees from reviewing applications, which we see as a very harmful ground for conflict of interest. All right. A bit more about Egypt. Perceived challenges to research ethics functioning are lack of guidance from the national level in terms of research ethics guidelines. And as far as I know, the problem is being stressed not only in this publication, but in several others about Egypt. Standards for the operation of ethics committees and accreditation mechanism for research ethics committees. That is also very important because in Latvia, in comparison, there are also a couple of ethics committees members that we know that are there simply because they know someone who invited them. They do not have a special kind of knowledge about research ethics in theoretical sense. They are, for instance, just representatives of a general population, say journalists or policemen or anyone. So you might actually doubt their competence. And other frequently mentioned challenges involve the inability to monitor or approve protocols. So there's no follow-up there, lack of ongoing training for its members, and insufficient member competency review process. Now, in Jordan, the situation is even more interesting because it is not even known what is the number of research ethics committee. Does anyone have this number? Ilham says that there are 70. All right, I put that number next to the Research Ethics Committee. So there are 17 Research Ethics Committees in Jordan. But what is known about Jordan is that it is one of the few Arab countries in the Middle East that has national regulations governing the protection of human subjects in trials. So that is a very strong aspect in protection for human subjects, to have a national regulations. At least there's this support from legislation. However, this law is not without flaws, as Professor Silverman and others indicate in their article. So it does not focus on an important aspect of the balancing risks and benefits, confidentiality protections, permission to withdraw from the research, and issues involving distributive justice, including fairness in the selection of research subjects. It also fails to consider children as separate, vulnerable subgroup of their own, and it does not refer to professional integrity as a key aspect. And in a Hyder framework, professional integrity is one of the key aspects. So in a way, you can see that there's some kind of a general agreement among theorists, among those who explore research ethics committee situation in different countries, that this is very, very. Finally, there are anecdotal reports, and I like those anecdotal reports, because there's few about Latvian research ethics committees here, that general knowledge of the law is lacking in Jordan. And this is also a problem, I might say, in Latvia and other countries, post-Soviet countries, I'd say. A national awareness campaign is needed to ensure that investigators and potential research participants are aware of the law. Because people, in the situation that people for years and years are used not to having any rights and not to having any protection, the sudden protection from the law needs to be also introduced to them, because it might be a novel thing, a thing they're not very used to. Moving on then. So next thing is institutional commitments. As you know, research ethics committees might be attached to institutions, or they might function as IRBs, institutional review boards. And on one hand, institutions are, of course, as everything in a country, influenced by local socioeconomic and political circumstances. On the other hand, they can create their own culture, and this is what actually is the task of those who work in those institutions to teach. Me and my colleagues, we are trying to sort of speak more about ethics, emphasize it, and thus one of the big problems that we are dealing with educationally is the problem of students copying. That's an old Soviet heritage for copying. Copying was actually a widespread practice. Institutional commitments also spreads to protection of participants. This is also a task of institutions to look after what happens in the research project. And then there's also promotion of ethical conduct that institution must do within its walls. And research ethics should be assigned appropriate institutional priority. It should not be one of the last things they take care of. It should be one of the first things. And there must be organizational structures and procedures to do that, to ensure that. and there must be also conformity to the general framework of national laws and national guidelines. Right. Moving on. And the final part, equality, not the final, one before final, quality of research ethics review. That is just a bullet points, few things. This is the most difficult thing to study. If you're a scientist interested in evaluating research ethics systems, how to study independence, how to evaluate scrutiny of protocols, how to measure the authority to approve or deny, and how to actually monitor or find things out about overseeing, and what about the correction of corrective action. Research ethics committees, as I mentioned previously, are not very keen to share this kind of information. They're not very keen to reveal them their own inner workings, but that should also be changed. And as Lean indicates, while the establishment of research ethics in Middle East has recently increased, the quality and consistency of ethical review remains unclear. And perhaps this might be an idea for you as researchers to research this aspect. As you can see, there might be a few very interesting publications that would come out of it. And the final part is here. Finally, this is the research integrity in terms of the investigator's conduct. And first of all come the personal goals and ambitions. Gloria objects to the idea that the RECs cannot be observed, their conduct cannot be observed. Well, this is a tricky issue. This is a really tricky issue. I would say in some cases I would favor for an observer, at least in the countries where respect for the laws and for the rules is not that established.
Yeah, I have a comment. I guess there might be a difference between monitoring and overseeing the researcher's conduct. I think one could monitor after the fact by seeing if papers are in order, if signatures have been obtained on the informed consent forms. But I think there's, and sometimes, like in my IRB, they might tell an investigator, we're going to observe the next time you get informed consent. I'm somewhat cynical about that process because what could I say? I think the next time, if an investigator knows that they're going to be observed, the next time they obtain informed consent, how they obtain informed consent may differ very much from what they actually do. And so it might be very difficult to actually monitor the actual conduct on a somewhat regular basis. Having said that, I think that one way to get around that is to one way to have the conduct monitored in real time is to have a culture in which and this might be difficult, but to have a culture in which people who are part of the process could actually send in their complaints. For example, in the past, participants themselves could call a hotline and voice any objections they have with the process, or maybe the nurse coordinators could also monitor themselves the conduct of the investigators, and vice versa. Other than that, I I really can't see the IRB. It might be interesting to even discuss whether this is the role of the IRB. I mean, I think there's so much that they could do in auditing or monitoring what evidence of what has happened in the past. It's a tricky issue, this whole monitoring business.
27 contains just the bullet points on investigating. Here we see that personal goals and ambitions play a big role in researchers' willingness to comply to the rules and obligations, as well as opportunities for satisfying personal goals. These opportunities might not be so many, so in some countries researchers might be too eager, too zealous to actually satisfy those goals. And willingness to follow rules in general. In Latvia, I've noticed that the situation, because of the turmoil, the fall of Soviet Union, the whole idea of rules and the law has been really shaken throughout the 90s and early 2000 years. So this willingness to follow the rules is now something that we are struggling to get back to, because many people have learned to live in the gray area where there are no clear rules, where nothing is really clearly defined, and whether to follow or not to follow rules is a matter of, if half of the community is not paying taxes, then you see that it's not following the rules, and there's a daily practice and nobody gets punished for that. So there's a greater temptation to break the rules constantly on an everyday basis. And finally, there's this respect for government, institution, recs, and research ethics review process itself, which, as I already said, is not very high in post-Soviet countries. At least Latvia in particular. And then perspective of the importance of research ethics review is also of a matter. And one more thing, up to now, we have not been having anyone standing out as a leader or opinion maker who would perhaps shape this moral climate towards a more ethical, more rules-based approach to research ethics. Public advocacy for research ethics review is also an issue, and we are sadly lacking this. We are really struggling with this. I'm trying whatever I can, but you cannot always respond to everything. And we are just in the very beginning of creating a public field, a public discourse of research ethics. That's a fairly new thing for us. And this is the literature I've been using for constructing this presentation. Just wants to sorry, not yet. I just want to stress that you can find Corruption Perception Index, and you can find these articles by Hyder and Lavery. I think Lavery is something that you can find freely on the internet. You can just log on to find it and to read more. And articles by Professor Silverman here, these two. They have been very big help for constructing this presentation. And Amartya Sen's book, and there's my article here that has been recently, up to yesterday, available freely on the internet, but today something has happened. So there's an attempt to explore this, the whole issue in Latvia. So in conclusion, just let me say, get back to the very first key. You can see that all these areas interacting together are very relevant for research ethics review, for the whole process for establishment of a correctly functioning research ethics system. So this is it. Thank you for your attention.